The smell comes first, iron mixed with damp earth. Then the sound, a scream that echoes inside stone walls but never quite escapes them. Above, sunlight crashes down onto the sand of the Colosseum, blinding, golden, theatrical. Below, in the tunnels where daylight never reaches, something else is happening. Something Rome preferred not to name. We talk about gladiators as tragic heroes, enslaved warriors, men forced to fight and die for the pleasure of the masses. Their names survive in mosaics and inscriptions. Their deaths are retold as spectacle, courage, brutality. But there is another story, one the textbooks rarely mention, a story about the women who were captured. The women gladiators did not meet in the arena, but beneath it, in the cells under the sand. A story about what Rome did with its female prisoners, and what the gladiators, those men reshaped into weapons, did to them. Before we descend into those forgotten tunnels, support this channel dedicated to the silenced truths of history. Subscribe and leave a like. It's a small gesture, but it allows us to keep uncovering what empires tried to bury along with their victims. The official version is comfortable. It says Roman women were protected by law, that gladiators were strictly controlled, that the empire operated under moral codes. But the documents tell another story, one written in testimonies that survived by accident, in private letters that were never meant to last, in cold administrative records that reveal horror without meaning to. In an accounting fragment found in the archives of Pompeii, dated around 62 CE, a lanista, the owner of a gladiator school, records the purchase of 12 barbarian females at a reduced price for recreational use by the fighters. The line continues with the same indifference used to record livestock. Cost to be recovered within 6 months through private rentals. Private rentals. 2 words, and an abyss opens beneath them. Rome did not see captured women as people. They were war spoils, merchandise, flesh. When Roman legions invaded Gaul, Germania, Britannia, North Africa, the men were killed or enslaved for hard labor. The women were assigned different fates. Some became domestic servants in wealthy homes. Others were sent to public brothels. But there was a third destination, less documented and far darker. The gladiator schools, the ludus, needed to keep their fighters motivated, controlled, rewarded. Gladiators were expensive investments. Training, food, medical care. Lanistas poured fortunes into men who were trained to kill and knew they would likely die in their next fight. These men were dangerous. Rebellions happened. Spartacus nearly tore the Republic apart. Rome learned. Keep them fed. Keep them satisfied. Keep them obedient. The prisoners were part of that system. In the underground levels of the Ludus Magnus, the largest gladiator school in Rome, directly connected to the Colosseum by tunnels, archaeologists found small, narrow cells with chains bolted into the walls. For decades, historians assumed these were punishment cells for disobedient fighters. But bone analysis conducted in 2018 revealed something else. The skeletons found there were female, young, marked by repeated trauma. A wax tablet discovered in Herculaneum, preserved by the ash of Vesuvius, contains a letter from a Thracian gladiator named Marcus to his mother. He writes about his training, his routines, his fights, and then, almost casually, he adds, "After victories, they give us the barbarian women. They say it is our right, our reward. But their eyes haunt me even when I sleep. Their eyes haunt me." There was a hierarchy even in horror. Veteran gladiators, those who survived multiple bouts, earned privileges, better quarters, better food, first access to the prisoners. Novices received what remained, but everyone participated. Refusal was seen as weakness, and weakness in the gladiator world meant death. The women had no names in the records. They were identified by origin. The Gaul, the German, the Briton, sometimes by appearance. The blonde, the tall one, the one with the scar on her face. They stopped being people long before reaching the ludus, when Roman soldiers captured them, when chains closed around their wrists, when hot iron burned ownership into their skin. By then, Rome had already decided they did not matter. A Roman physician named Galen, who worked as a surgeon in gladiator schools around 165 CE, left detailed medical notes. He described treatments for combat wounds, specialized diets, recovery exercises. And buried among these clinical observations is a short, disturbing passage. The females kept on the second lower level frequently develop fevers resistant to treatment. I recommended isolation, but the owners insist the cost of replacement is lower than the cost of prolonged care. The cost of replacement is lower. Galen was speaking about human lives with the same detachment a farmer might use for sick animals. And there was something even darker. Something Rome turned into spectacle. It wasn't only gladiators who used these prisoners. The Roman public wanted a share as well. In the Colosseum, at chariot races in the Circus Maximus, during public festivals, they wanted to participate in the degradation. There was a form of execution Rome practiced that textbooks rarely mention. Damnatio ad bestias, condemnation to the beasts. Criminals, prisoners of war, Christians were thrown into the arena with lions, bears, tigers. The crowd loved it. But there was a more cruel variation. Female prisoners, especially those of high status in their original societies, daughters of tribal chiefs, priestesses, captured queens, were subjected to theatrical executions. Public reenactments of Roman myths, where they were forced to play female figures in scenes of mythological sexual violence. Pasiphae and the bull, Leda and the swan, Europa abducted. The Roman historian Suetonius, writing about Emperor Nero, describes one such event. He ordered a British prisoner of noble family to be dressed as Princess Andromeda and chained to a post in the arena. Then he released a gladiator dressed as Perseus, but instead of saving her, commanded that he possess her before 50,000 spectators. 50,000 people, watching, applauding. Rome didn't just permit this violence, it aestheticized it, turned it into myth, into art, into divine entertainment. And the gladiators, were they victims or perpetrators? The answer is both. And that is what makes the story so disturbing. The gladiators were enslaved men, captured, bought, forced to fight to the death. They had no freedom, no future beyond the next match. Many were brutalized from childhood, trained to kill, numbed to suffering. They were human weapons forged by Rome, but they were still men. Men who, when given even temporary power, used it on those even more vulnerable. The prisoners were not their enemies, not combatants. They were terrified women. And still, most gladiators accepted the reward offered to them. On the wall of a cell in the ludus of Capua, a piece of graffiti was found. It reads, "Victory over 10 men in the arena? Defeat every night when I close my eyes." Beneath it, in different handwriting, someone added, "The gods judge us not by what we are forced to do, but by what we do when no one forces us." No one forced them. The Lanistas offered the women as rewards. Yes, but refusal was possible. Some did refuse. A Greek gladiator named Nicomedes requested to be whipped instead of accepting a Gallic prisoner. He was mocked by other fighters, called weak, called a woman. But he chose humiliation over violence. Most did not. The system was perfect in its cruelty. Rome took victims and turned them into perpetrators, took brutalized men and gave them others to brutalize. And so the cycle continued. Justified, normalized. The women who survived, and few did, were eventually discarded, sold to the cheapest brothels, sent to mines, to remote farms. Some simply vanished from the records. There are no graves for them, no memorials, no names carved in stone. Rome built triumphal arches to celebrate conquest, raised statues to generals, minted emperors onto coins. But the women who passed through the tunnels beneath the Colosseum, those offered as rewards to victorious gladiators, those violated before cheering crowds, Rome chose to forget. And for centuries, so did we. We agreed to that forgetting, quietly, comfortably. As historian Mary Beard, a specialist in ancient Rome, once wrote, "The greatness of Rome was built on a sea of suffering we prefer not to examine too closely. Because if we really look, truly look, we begin to recognize something unsettling. The mechanisms Rome used to dehumanize did not vanish with the empire. They merely changed shape. Those mechanisms survive whenever we turn people into abstractions, when we label them barbarians, enemies, invaders, criminals, when we decide certain groups deserve less dignity, fewer rights, less compassion. Rome said its prisoners were less than human because they were outsiders, because they were conquered, because Rome believed it possessed a divine right to dominate. Under that logic, any violence became acceptable, any horror became order. The gladiators told themselves they deserved those women, that it was their right, their reward for risking death in the arena. And under that logic, they learned to silence the eyes that haunted them.